Welcome to the Hustle and Flow podcast.
A platform we use to explore varying perspectives and opinion through candid conversation.
We chat about philosophy, business, and all things life. I'm Shaun the Hustle.
And I'm Les the Flow.
Let's go.
All right, Shauno, today is my turn for the topic. And today I want to talk about the word and the concept time.
Time.
Yeah. So I guess we can talk about this on so many different levels. On your generic level, when we're talking about linear time, we talk about, the calendar and all that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But then we can also strip back and talk a little bit more, I think, if you want to put it that way, universally or cosmically, about what time really entails in terms of our existence as human beings.
Okay.
Time for me has always been this thing that has been a real constricting factor in my life. Given that you and I we've both grown up and been brought up in the modern world, and time being one of those very key factors that everyone talks about. There's all these sayings surrounding time is the most valuable commodity, and all that sort of thing, and it has always had an impact on me, and I've always felt like it's been one of those things that has really for a long time, even now, caused some level of anxiety for me, in one way or another. So yeah, that's the topic I wanted to talk about today, mate. So throwing over to you, what do you think about or immediately comes to mind when I say the word time?
So when you say the word time, first thing that jumps up in my mind or rushes to the front is, what have I got to do and when do I have to do it by? So that's, I guess, a lot of people's concept of time, right? And time is usually viewed as finite. We all are told, and well, it's true, you have a limited amount of it in your lifetime. However much you have, none of us know. And the one thing that I guess is interesting about it is we get to choose how to use it. And it's allotted to all of us. As long as you're breathing, you have it, right? It's one of those things though that I guess we're afforded, and we always feel there's a lack of. I'm yet to meet someone who thinks, I have all the time in the world, or, thinks that they have this massive abundance of time. I don't really know anyone like that. How about you?
No, and that's an interesting thread. I'd like to hold on to that in terms of that feeling of not having enough time. Let's follow that thread down, once you finish off what you're about to.
So, yeah, man, I think time is relative. It's relative for all people, like relative based on comparison as well. I think that everybody has things that they want to do, things they want to achieve, or things they want to get done or to have happen. And everybody most people tend to put a timeline on it, right? Like you always hear about, when you make goals, make sure that they're timed. And, you hear about SMART goals, and the T in the SMART is timed. People that try to achieve things or have higher goals or just goals in general tend to place a timeline on those. And it's interesting because, I've heard really successful people like Dave Meltzer say things like, when you put a time on a goal, you're kind of setting yourself up to fail because, in his view, he believes that the universe doesn't really flow according to our own mortal timelines, right? And even with that, regardless of what you ascribe to spiritually or, what you think about the universe and its timing, there is something changes when you put a timeline on something, right? How you approach it, the anxiety you feel towards it or not, how realistic you think it's going to be in terms of the achievement of your goal. For example, a lot of people have, I want to make this much money by this time. Or they, will say something along the lines of, I want to be married by this age, or I want to have kids by this age. A lot of these things are determinate based on your effort, but some things just aren't. You know what I mean? For example, like if you want to have a kid by a certain age, there's things you can definitely do to help you towards that goal. But at the end of the day, no one's worked out a surefire way to do that. And putting a timeline on it can put stress on people. You also have to question why you've placed the timeline on something that you have. Like why you've allotted just that much amount of time to it. Why does that have to be the case for you? Or why is it important that that's the case for you? So these are all the sorts of things that come up when I think about time. I usually look at it from the perspective of we use time to dictate results, right? And whether that be, business-wise or personally, whether it's something to do with your health, it's always tends to be, I want X to happen by Y time.
Right.
As opposed to just, I want X to happen.
Right.
And it's something that I've actually thought about in a bit more depth. Probably around the start of this year, after I heard David Meltzer say that about, the universe doesn't really work on your time and you're kind of setting yourself up for not such a good result if you tend to put a timing on certain things. He puts in terms of, when people have a financial goal, for example, they're like, I want to make this much money by this date. It's like, well, if the universe doesn't work to your timeline, it's kind of already setting yourself up for failure there. Whereas if you have a different goal, for example, like my financial goal now is to just make as much money as I can as fast as possible. And it kind of relieves some anxiety that I have personally, right? Because I'll put my best foot forward and I'll put in my effort. And also it helps me to not think of things in a finite amount, right? Because I could say, I want X dollars by this date, but I could have more dollars, right? Money's it's a made up concept for one, but in the world we live in, we're not limited to how much we can make depending on what we choose to do, right? So why do we put a cap on it? And I think it's this whole, we try to wrap our head around these things and really intellectualize certain concepts that are hard to intellectualize.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, so tell me more about this, this concept that you just mentioned about time and result. And talk me through that concept and what it means for you, and whether it's a positive thing, a negative thing, or impartial thing, or is it just something for you that you ascribe to yourself in order to incite action, or talk to me more about that.
Yeah, so I guess it begins with what result I'm seeking and what that result is in relation to, right? So it's obviously based on my priorities, and there's certain things that you need to get done by a certain period or certain time, and that is usually the case because someone else is relying on that outcome, right? So for example, in my business, we do fulfillment of orders. People are expecting that within a certain amount of time, right? So got to make sure that processes are carried out within a certain period, things are handled by a certain time of day, and that a lot of processes are completed for the client to get things in the time that they feel is suitable, right?
Yep.
And I guess that's another thing. Everybody has their own view on time, whether you think about it or not, and everybody has their own measurements. And I think one of the areas where conflict arises between people, whether it be in a relationship or, in any type of setting, business, personal, it's happens because of a conflict on the timeline or the time scale. One person wants something to happen by a certain time and the other does, or the other might disagree with that timeline, or they're not able to deliver on that, and then it puts the person on the other side out somehow in their feelings. And I feel like a lot of the anxiety that people face or disappointment that they feel is because of some assessment of time and how it hasn't been met, right? I kind of lost where we started on that, but my mind's just traveling a lot, I guess.
That's cool.
And yeah, man, like time versus result is just, people have in mind a lot of times how long they think something should take, but it's how long they think it should take. And I think a lot of the frustrations that people have around time and lack of result based on the timeline, it comes from comparison.
Yep.
Right? For example, you have a group of friends and all of your friends are getting married, but you're not. Or you see people around you having children, you want children, but you're not. Or you run a business and the people around you, their business is performing really well, but yours isn't performing that well yet. And you feel frustration around it because it's not happening to you right now. But there's a whole bunch of different factors that go into it. And those factors aside, it's why should it be happening at the time that you want it to happen? And why do you think that it should happen in that time, right? Just because something happens for someone else within a certain time period doesn't mean that it's going to happen for you that way, or that it should happen for you that way. There's a whole bunch of factors that go into it. And I think that when you compare your timeline to someone else's, a lot of times you're mitigating a lot of factors, or you're not thinking about certain things that have gone into that. I think as humans, we do that a lot. And you're kind of setting yourself up for a shit time.
Yeah. Pun intended there. No. I think, look, that's what it is. I mean, it's a very generic lens that is applied on top of a lot of things, not just time. But I want to follow this back through a little bit and just unpack it a little bit more, right? And going back to the thread that we mentioned back, before earlier, about this feeling towards time,
mm-hmm.
right? And when we say that already, right, it's a feeling, so it's subjective, no?
Yeah.
So this notion towards time and attachment to time, our assessment of it, of what is, quote unquote acceptable or not, or the right amount of time or the right time frame, all these sorts of things, they're all subjective, right?
Mm-hmm.
Although we see them or assess them using a generic lens that most people look at it through, it still doesn't mean that it is right or wrong. Like, it doesn't mean it's the objective truth.
Yeah.
It's a generic lens, yes, but it's a general lens. It's generally applied, right? It can't apply to everything in every situation. And I think it's an interesting thing to think about, because like I said, I personally have had and struggled for a very long time with the concept of time, and it has brought a lot of anxiety. And I think, it follows this thread of this old saying from Lao Tzu, who said, if you're living in the past, or if you're living in the future, you're anxious. There is only really the present. And I think that's what we're thinking about. There's a projection of either backwards or forwards, back into the past, forward into the future, but we're not here in this present moment, like with regards to time. Because if you really think about it, both those things are on either side of presence. They're just conceptions of the mind. We're just making things up, We're thinking about them. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're actually so. Regardless of whether it happened in the past, it's still just a memory. And a memory doesn't mean it is a objective recollection or representation of what actually happened.
That's right. You're taking a moment and applying a meaning to it.
That's right. So I think with that, there's a lot of examples that I can give for myself in terms of like how I've always been, I guess, governed by time, like linear time. Like you think about
like what comes to mind first off.
Like back in the day, when I worked in corporate, I would catch a train, public transport, to work every day to the office, and more often than not, my general response to if I had the choice of arriving early or late, it's definitely arriving early, because it lifted a sense of like burden from my shoulders. Like, and where that come from, I don't know. You know, I remove this risk, or I reduce the risk of me potentially being late. And what does that even mean? You know, being late. Being late, there's negative connotation to it. You know, there's punishment, reprimand, all that sort of thing. But again, in the context of my job and the role that I played, I was a manager. You know, it really didn't matter one way or another, and it was more flexible than anything else in terms of, like, you know, what I'm trying to say is there wasn't any, you know, negative outcome.
There wasn't any crazy consequence.
Yeah, if I was to be late, you know. But it's still, if I had the option, I would always choose to be early rather than late. You know, and like maybe that's something that I was taught when I was younger as well. You know, about punctuality. You know, don't keep people waiting. Time is valuable. Don't waste people's time. All that sort of thing. Whether that was ingrained in me to say that, look, time is valuable to me. It should be valuable to anyone else. You don't want others to waste your time, so don't do the same. You know, vice versa. And it's always been this thing, like, you know, and like, again, if you think about, you plug yourself into that environment, that very like linear time, production, efficiency, that sort of corporate environment, right? It thrives on linearity. It thrives on production and outcome. You know, within this time frame of every day, I'm going to produce X, Y, and Z. That's your key performance. You know, that's what you should be producing. You know, that is your, you know, benchmark. If you produce more than that, then you exceed and you get, you know, more bonus, whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
You get a reward. And so that sort of very simple formula to operation, you know, more work, you know, the more output within a same amount of time will put you ahead, will give you the advancement that you need, that you want, you know, to quote unquote succeed. I don't know, I've always operated and been governed by that, but it's always been something that I too have been quite uncomfortable with, you know, because like you said, and let's talk more about this David Meltzer concept in a second, right? But it's something that I've discovered in the past, you know, 12 to 18 months myself, is that creative output is very different, and it is not governed, or it doesn't play by linear time. Because this thing, it's innate. It's something that came way before we even, you know, conceptualized what time was, you know, in human history. We must remember that the same thing as with language. Time is something that we humans created. So it is very different. We're trying to box a lot of things in the conceptions that we come up with. But that creative output, it just doesn't play by those rules. It just doesn't. Yeah,
you can't just sit down and go, this is the time I'm going to be creative, or I'm going to be creative for the next hour and a half.
That's right.
It's not how it works.
That's right.
And I think, like, in essence, time is a measurement. And people, like, we're just obsessed with measuring things, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, I'd actually read an article a while ago about time itself, and it was interesting. It was actually about how standard time came to be. And, like, we now have this concept, and we just think it's the way it's always been. A lot of the time is that this is the time here, so we just measure, and we've got time zones. We know it's a time, whatever time it is here means it's this time in another place, right? But before technology and the advent of technology and being able to track everything in quote unquote real time, we had like mechanical instruments. They weren't always accurate. So, for example, this article talked about how if you caught a train from one side of a country to another side of the country, wherever you stopped along the way, the time was actually different, right? Because someone at that station that was en route to where you were going was keeping time using a certain clock, and it might be faster than the clock that you were using. So you might arrive at a place and it's meant to be 12 p.m., but that clock says it's 12:30, right? But you're trying to work out things based on your first clock. So what's interesting about that is like time is completely made up by us. And someone just came up with a measurement of what a second is, a minute is, an hour is, day, years, months, all that, right? And then at one point in time, we decided on what that was collectively, and that's a unit of measurement. Now, it's really useful for certain things, like if you're baking a cake, you know how long it's going to take for something to happen, or, you know, in terms of procedures, it's great. Like things that are cut and dry. You know, something's been tested, it holds true over and over again. You do this, you leave it for this amount of time, or you do this for this amount of time, that's going to get you X result, right? But there are some things, like you said, like creativity, that you can't apply that to. And that's the thing is that I'm trying to get at, is you can't measure everything. And the measurement you place on it as well is something that you have to agree upon or ascribe to yourself. And, you know, you mentioned how you don't know how this, I guess, perceived anxiety you have towards time comes around. But maybe it was ingrained in you. You know, we are all told these things, like these adages of time is valuable. We don't want to waste people's time. And, you know, time is more valuable than money. But like, I think we just take those things at face value without actually thinking about what time are we talking about.
Yeah. And I think an important point, right? It really comes down to, because time is valuable for everyone, and we know that, right? Because it is finite.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, as conceptual as you want to get, the fact is time is real.
Yeah.
You know,
for sure.
There is an agreed scale that we all agree on and that we ascribe. That's why we can meet at somewhere at the same time, or, you know, that we choose to do something. We know how long it's going to take. We know what, you know, what measure and what resource of our own to give it based on that scale. So like, it's definitely a real thing. You know what I mean? And I guess our collective notion of it dictates a lot of these things, because it is finite. And whenever something's finite, like, you just value it more, right?
Yeah. And I think the interesting thread, and something that we can talk about, each of us, because I'm sure that actually I know that both of our, I guess, general values and purposes towards what we use our time for and what we, I guess, strive toward is quite different, right? And I think that plays a very pivotal part in how you use your time, right?
Yeah.
It's very important. Like you said, at face value, at surface, time is valuable for everyone. But then how we use it is determined by what means something to us. You know, if you want to put it in a very generic, like, what is our purpose, what we feel that is, you know, that to me is like the difference between whether we quote unquote waste or don't waste time. You know, if you're working towards your purpose, whatever that is, and that's the key, like, whatever that is for you, then you're not really wasting your time. You know, it's not for anyone else to say whether you're wasting your time or not, right? Because that's your time to waste or use, right? In whatever way you see fit, you know? But it has to be towards that purpose that you feel like you are here for, you know? And that's going to be different for everyone.
Yeah, and I think you can also, for want of a better like, you can change the scale, right? Like, it can be your purpose in the moment, or it can be your life's purpose, or whatever it is. You need to work out what's important to you first. And then one thing I'm thinking about at the moment is, I think that our relationship with time also relates quite closely to the resources we have at hand, right? Like, most of us trade our time for money, right? That's like what employment is essentially based around. It's you're going to do this thing for me for this amount of time, and I'm going to give you this much money for it. If you're someone who has like a plethora of money, you're probably going to look at time a bit different, because you don't have to trade your time to get more money, right? If you're someone who's got an illness and you've been told you have a certain amount of time to live, whether that be the case or not, and you think about it, your time is going to be, you're going to treat your time very differently to someone who's not thinking about that or doesn't have, a terminal diagnosis placed on them. So where you're at and the resources available to you, I think, play a major factor in how you approach time and the value you place on it.
Yeah, that is true. But I think that even in your first example, right, with people who are, and this is like the majority view of what a career and a job is, trading time for money, what is the end goal there for most people? They essentially, right, the goal there for most people is to make enough money so they can have their time back.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's the difference there. Like, I get it. Like from the ground level, that's where we're starting. For most people, that's where it is, because that's the reality of living in the modern world.
Mm-hmm.
We need X amount of money to create X amount of resources so that we can support ourselves and sustain ourselves and create more time for ourselves to do what, quote unquote, we want, right? I think that's the general view. So in essence, that is a trade of time for money in the pursuit of more time.
Yeah.
Or to have back the most time as possible.
Yeah.
So time is always a valuable thing there. But again, like, the end goal there is not necessarily to make more resources. It's to have the time so that you can spend doing the things you, quote unquote, want to do, whatever those things are, And again, it draws back up to that higher life purpose. And most people don't know what that is. A lot of people don't know what that is. But you need time to figure that out. Yeah. So I think that's important. I think that is always going to be a guiding principle for how you use your time. What is important to you? What is your life purpose? Those sorts of things, they center around the same themes for every individual, regardless of whether it's clear to you or not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm thinking about what you said earlier, which is, we trade our time for money to try and get time back. And it's kind of one of those chicken and the egg things, right? But then I feel like we all want to do certain things or different things, and they require some type of resource. And it's about trying to find, I guess you're prioritizing in that case.
Totally.
And when it comes to prioritizing, you need to work out what your priorities are.
Yeah.
And that's one thing I think is really important when in relation to time is, whose priorities are you working to?
Yeah. And 100%, like most things in life, in this day and age, will require some level of resources to support you to do what you need to do. Unless you go out and, live the nomadic life in a cave or in the bush and become like a hunter-gatherer and things like that. And people do that. That's cool. But you don't need, that's your edge case of not needing resources. But I guess the point is that it's not necessarily the case that it's all about, accumulation of wealth all the time, right? Again, if it doesn't matter to you that much, if your purpose lies in the wilderness, then it's different, right? There isn't a pursuit of wealth to free yourself from this world, right?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that that time does evoke anxiety for most people. Like I was saying earlier, I don't think I've met anyone who just has said to me or feels like, oh, I've just got all the time in the world. Because one, you actually don't, right? We're all going to leave our body someday, and we all know that happens. So, like, we all have this, I guess, clock on us. We don't know how long we got, but a lot of times we just put things off, or I feel like a lot of us operate like we do have all the time in the world, and that's interesting to me. Is that like an optimism? Is it,
I think that from that angle of operation, it's just that it's not something that is front of mind. I feel that's what the case is. So I think a really good way for people to think about that more is like it's like an ancient Stoic saying back in ancient Greece, where the Stoic philosophers used to say Memento Mori, right? Which basically translates from Latin to remember your mortality, And if that is something that is always front of mind, then of course, like you said, that example about someone with a terminal illness, their mortality or their sense of mortality is front of mind. So they're going to spend their time differently to someone who doesn't think about that all the time,
Yep.
right? And it needn't necessarily be something as, bleak as that, if you want to see it that way. Like, I personally don't. I think it's a very freeing thing to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't, and you can see it any other way, it's just about, understanding the finiteness of your existence here.
Yeah.
And if you have that front of mind, then perhaps you will spend your time differently.
Yeah, for sure. Like, to use a personal example, so we've talked about, your story and your diagnosis of cancer. And for me personally, right, I remember we were in Hong Kong together. We went for our friends Jenny and Kevin's wedding. And after their wedding, we went to a bar for an after party. And I remember you and I were talking. And I can't remember how it came up, but I distinctly remember that I told you that when you told me that you had been diagnosed with cancer, because how old were you?
28.
Yeah. And I think I was 26. And I was just had this moment after you told me, and I digested it because, it's very shocking to hear someone so young, let alone someone you really care about, has been diagnosed with cancer before you know any of the prognosis or anything like that. And just like it just sent my mind running along this path, right? That got me to a point of, wow, if I was in your situation, and regardless of, everything's turned out fine, and you've actually taken the experience that you've had as a positive one and taken a lot from it, right? But I remember back at that time, I thought, like, we're so young, and what if you were diagnosed with cancer and you knew you were going to die? And up until this point, that's like everything that you've done and experienced, like, that's it. And it made me shift what I wanted to do with my life. I remember telling you that. Up until that point, I worked like really, really hard at a corporate career. And I had all these things in my mind that I thought I wanted to do that I was nowhere near experiencing or doing. And then it made me think, shit, what if I never got the chance to do that? And then it got me thinking why aren't I doing that? Why aren't I bringing some of those things forward? Because some of them are things that I could do in that moment, right? And it just made me frame things differently. When someone close to you gets news like that and you hear about it, like, I think we all do it. We just go to this place of putting ourselves in their shoes for whatever reason. And things like that put time into perspective for you, I feel.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's a very simple thought experiment, right? For a lot of people.
Yeah.
Think about what would you do if tomorrow was your last day?
Yeah.
What would you do differently?
Yeah. Totally. The reason I bring up that story and that experience is because it profoundly shifted me. You know what I mean? I remember telling you that. And it did, man. Because after that, I started to think about what do I want to do with my life? And time is going to run out. At some point, it's going to be out. And if you're not doing things sooner rather than later, there's a very good chance they're not going to be done. Or you're not going to do them. And you're not going to have those experiences. And it made me like, that was one of the reasons that I chose to get out of corporate and to pursue my own path in business, because it was something that I felt that I wanted to do, but I hadn't really thought about up until that point, like how and when I would do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I never put a time on it. That made me put a time on it. So while we feel anxiety towards time, in a lot of cases and a lot of different situations, scenarios, sometimes that anxiety actually turns out to be a good thing and pushes us in a direction that we wouldn't have gone in had we not felt the anxiety and then done something about it, like taken the steps to actually go through a thought process, work out why you're feeling that way, and then think about where you actually want to be and doing something about it. Because yeah, not long after that, man, I did go into just doing business for myself. And you know what? Like, yeah, maybe I would have chosen to do that anyway at some point, but it definitely would not have happened like in that time frame for me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it really made me think about shit. Like,
Yeah.
what the fuck are you doing? And like, what are you doing this for? And why are the things that you think are important to you?
Yeah.
And should they be?
And I think the purpose of that really isn't so much to, speed up the process or any process per se, right? It's really the key in that entire thought experiment or that experience is either a shift or an expansion of perspective,
Yeah.
A shift from, you seeing blindly or moving in a very automated fashion down a certain route without thinking about certain things, and then highlighting certain things, like you're taking things for granted, right? What would you do if your time was capped and you knew when it was going to end, and it flips you to actually seeing things like being grateful for certain things in your life as well.
Yeah.
Right? So that's the expansion of, perspective that we may not think about on a daily basis, because we are so distracted by our thoughts and the things that are happening outside the world that we fail to realize that, it's sort of like this peripheral thing that we just, the average lifespan is about, 80 or 90 or whatever. I've got plenty of time, blah, 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 blah,
Yeah.
And it, I guess, in your 20s, it is quite some time away if you think about it relatively.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it can go by in a flash, as we all know as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. I think, like, really do we think about what we're doing with our time, like, in a continuous fashion? And I say that in terms of, when someone dies and you go to a funeral, your mind generally goes to this place of, like that's it. That was it for them. And what did they do in their life? Did they do everything they want? And you always hear these stories about, elderly people. And if you talk to them, they always think about and wish they'd done certain things. They reflect on their time here on earth up until that point. And they often talk about the things that they wish they did, and it's a stark reminder that you don't have all the time in the world.
Yeah.
And it makes me think about, like, for a lot of things that you want to do, why not now?
Yeah.
Some things take certain amount of resource, or, there's other factors at play. But a lot of times there's, why not now? And look, that's not to say that you just run out and do everything on impulse that you want to do now. There's certain things that if you do want to have more time, we know you shouldn't be doing. Like, just because you want to eat a burger every day and eat pizzas and french fries and shit doesn't mean you do that every day. Like, why not now? I'll tell you why not, because you're going to reduce your lifespan.
Totally. I mean, there's like these pros and cons. There's like good and bad. So, and like, again, subjective. And that's just my projection of some sort of, judgment from my end, right? So take it how you will,
Yeah.
right? But to me, there is certainly right and wrong way to use these sorts of like I guess perspectives on time, like this like YOLO, right?
Yeah.
You can use it in a good way or a positive way that's progressive to you, and one that's detrimental, like you said. YOLO, I'm gonna eat burgers every day. YOLO, I'm gonna fucking try everything that I want to try.
Yeah.
In this life. And like it always comes back to, for me, like what is important to you? What are your priorities? What is driving those decisions? What is the purpose to your use of this time that you have? If you aspire to live long, then obviously it's contradictory for you to eat burgers every day.
Yeah.
If that's your aspiration. So you're using your time in an incorrect manner.
Yeah. I think there's also a level of foresight that you need. You just do, man.
Totally.
Because your priorities change.
Yeah, absolutely. They do.
And any amount of time that you've lived in your life, right? If you're listening to this podcast, you're going to be like a teenager above. You've lived through some different stages in life, from being, a little kid to being a little bit older kid to being a teenager. And even at those points in time, your priorities will have shifted massively. And so that being the case, and from what we all observe around us, the older we get, our priorities shift. And yeah, all of our journeys are individual, but for the most part, a lot of the priorities that we have tend to move in a certain fashion. And even if you don't want to look at those patterns and apply them to yourself, you feel that's too restrictive, I think we all need to acknowledge that your priorities do change. And decisions you make now will affect your future if you are fortunate enough to have one, right? Because time is afforded to us. We don't know how much. I really do see every day like as a gift. Yeah, man. I don't think I've told you, but I wake up every day, man. First thing I do is I thank God for another day. I know that sounds really cheesy, but Mark, man, when you do that and you actually feel it, it's profound.
Man, I mean, it's cheesy if you want to see it as cheesy, Yeah. But it's profound if you see it as a profound action.
Totally. And the reason I have that practice, right, is because I heard this example, this comparison from Brad Lee, right? And he talks about, so say that right now, in this moment, I told you, I'm going to give you $1 million. How happy would you be about that? Or anyone, if I told someone I'm going to give you $1 million, you'd be pretty fucking happy about it, right? But what if I told you that you're not going to wake up tomorrow? So you can have the $1 million, but you're not going to wake up tomorrow.
Yeah.
Right? No one's going to take it. No one's going to choose the $1 million over waking up tomorrow. But the fact is, right? So everyone listening right now, you thought about that. Would you take $1 million and not wake up tomorrow? Or would you want to wake up tomorrow? Everyone's going to say, I want to wake up tomorrow.
Yeah.
And all of us listening to this, every day up till now, you've fucking woken up. And you just told me that you wouldn't take the $1 million. You'd prefer to wake up. So you're essentially getting more than $1 million every day. You should be really happy about that. And that's how I look at it now. Like, after I thought about it, I was like, fuck, it's so true. None of us would take money over waking up. Totally. Yeah, every day we wake up and a lot of us are like, fuck, I wish I had this, I wish I had that. But just now think about it. You choose waking up every time.
Yeah.
Right? And that's how I look at it. Like, it's the most valuable thing. You get another crack. You get to experience things. You get to do things. And you will choose it over pretty much everything else. You know what I mean? You choose it over that what a lot of people think is a massive amount of money. So it's valuable. It's super valuable.
Yeah. Well, it is the only, I guess it's true that it is the most valuable commodity for all humanity, right? All humans. Yeah. Because it is the only, I guess, timeline, quote unquote, that is driven by natural means, right? It's not made up by anyone.
No, it's not.
So You know, I think that example, like, what that calls out is that it shows what people immediately value, you know, right? What is more valuable? Because, like you said, a lot of people think and feel that $1 million is extremely valuable, right? But it's more valuable than that.
Yeah.
So why do we treat each day as if it's not, or we just coast through life?
Totally. And you can put any amount of money on it, right? Be like, oh, what if you're a billionaire? What if you've got $100 million? Put whatever amount you want on it. You're never going to choose to not wake up.
Totally. And I mean, look, perhaps that question is best directed at most people. Like, when you ask me, my immediate reaction to $1 million, and it's a similar question to, like, I guess, if you were given X amount of money, or you woke up tomorrow and money was no longer a factor, how would you live your life differently?
Yeah.
You know? And, like, I always ask myself that question, and realistically, it's very much the same as what I'd be doing now, which like, you know, might help answer the question of the previous one, but it's also a I guess, an indication on what or how I'm using my time, right? Or what is driving that. There is clarity to that for me. And like I said, I always come back to this. But if you don't know what you want, then you will be chasing things that you think you want. But it's always going to end up back in the same spot of you asking whether there's more to this.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And I think the key to that is undertaking a critical process. And by that, I mean thinking about things further than one step of a question, right? There's that famous process where they say that you can get to the core of anything by asking why 7 times, right? And if you do that exercise, it generally tends to work out. But you have to actually do the process. And you do that process to work out what's important. Like, what is important at the core of something. And I think, like, regardless of how you think you want to spend your time, if you don't go through that process, you might not be spending it in the best possible way for you.
Yeah.
Like, you need to think about what's important to you, then why it's important, and then keep going down the path of why that's important until you can't distill it anymore.
Yeah.
Right? Because coming back to, you know, how we all trade our time for money, and, you know, the whole exercise of thinking about, if I was going to give you $1 million, but you can't wake up tomorrow, like, you're trading your time every day, likely for a lot less, right?
Totally.
Some people are making $1 million a day, which is awesome, but most of us aren't, right? And if that's what you want, I hope you get there someday. I truly do. But just think about that. Like, you're trading your time, which, by that example, is clearly so valuable for a lot less. And is that what you want to be doing?
Totally.
And also just think about how valuable your time really is in that context. That's super important. And I bring that up because maybe it'll get you to think about where you're spending your time, and you'll stop spending it on some dumb shit.
Yeah. And I think it's an interesting, I guess, thread to follow. It would be good for us each to unpack, I guess, what we use, or how we, I guess, approach our lives, or what it is that switches our conception of what time is and why it is valuable to us. You know, so if I ask you that question, what would you say that is for you?
Yep. So first off, like, straight up, I'm not some, like, time guru or guru of any type. Like, I still feel like I waste a lot of my time, and that I'm not spending it in the best possible way. And I think that has to do with, like, gratification of what you want in the moment versus what you want later. But I do think about it, and I feel like I spend my time much better than I used to. And like, it's important to me because, I have like goals and things that I want to do, and they involve other people, and I'm very aware that the time and the amount of years those people have left on earth are also limited. So it's increased my urgency. So, when it comes to my work, I keep that front of mind in terms of, if you don't get some of these things done, you're not going to be able to do the things you want to do with the people you want to do them with, because the time is going to run out. And you don't know when that is. So you should probably get a move on with that. And that's something that's in front of my mind a lot.
Yeah. And I think on the back of that, it's important to note that, and I've said this to you before and you've said it to me at the same time as well. What I'm trying to point out is there's always a very harsh, self-critic or self-critique about how we use our time and whether we can use it better. Like, I can personally say that I critique myself all the time and I'm hard on myself. But like, at the same time, you often, praise me for my efficiency or my ability to produce and things like that, right?
Yeah, like, I think you spend your time very well.
And I've done the same for you as well, right? Yeah. I say you're hard on yourself, right? So that's important to note. These are the types of things, like, again, they're subjective, right? But again, we are each our harshest critic in these things. And there is a reason for that. Like I said, I think there's a reason why I critique myself a certain way, because there's these like hard edges that have been sort of conditioned in myself surrounding like what time is and what production is and what efficiency is, all that sort of stuff. Like, I've always used time very easily and well, I think. I've always excelled in the corporate space. And I always say, people always say that, you make it seem so easy. I'm like, it is fucking easy, Like, I'm twiddling my thumbs sometimes, and they're like, fuck, you've done more than anyone else has done in 5-6 days worth of work. I'm like,
yeah,
that sort of thing. So it's different, right? So I wanted to point that out. Like, we each will always critique ourselves, but it's not so much about whether that's right or wrong, but there's like an underlying reason for that, right? In terms of my own conception of time and how I choose to use it effectively, it all surrounds like truth for me, right? That is for me the most important thing in my life. I believe that I'm here and I have innate truth that I'm born with, right? But that has been shrouded and covered up by layers and layers of conditioning throughout the years, through being brought up in this world. So my task, I believe, is to unravel all that and drill back down to remembering what my truth is, and then expressing out that to the world, within the time that I have been allotted. The way I see it is like, and I think the hourglass is a great, imagery and analogy to use, is that, it's the moment that you were born, the sand starts to drop. You don't know when that's going to end, but you just know that the sand is going to run out at some point. So that's my allotted time. And it's very like macro, There's nothing else to it. But for every moment, it should be spent on trying to discover the truth, And it doesn't necessarily always have to be something about movement or action or production. It's not, because this practice in itself, it takes a lot of time. And what I found for myself, right, and this is very different to a lot of people and what they think, right, I always come back to this point, because like I said, always conditioned to go, to sprint, to produce and be efficient and all that sort of stuff. But whenever I give myself space and I just sit in the presence of the moment, like a teacher of mine said that presence is timeless, right? Presence is timeless. The concept of time just falls away. I'm talking about the man-made concept. It falls away. And that's the space you need for everything else to fall away, the noise of the external world, to discover your truth, right? And like, when I sit for hours and hours and hours, like most people will say, what the fuck are you doing? You're wasting your time. You're not like writing a book. You're not releasing a blog. You're not editing. You're not blah, 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 blah. But like leaps and bounds, man, in terms of like, you know, my creative output, it's fucking chalk and cheese.
Yeah.
It comes out. It's the difference between like a dripping tap and a fucking fire hydrant, you know? So it's very different, yeah, for sure. But like, I just want to point out that, you know, sitting, and we talked about in one of our previous podcasts, reflection, it doesn't mean you're not doing anything, you know, as long as it's toward the purpose of what it is that you think you're here for.
For sure. And I think you need to be really mindful of whatever perception you have on time, that's your perception. And you get to choose that.
Totally.
Because you're taking on a perspective. So, you know, when you choose to take on a perspective, it's choice.
Totally.
You know what I mean? And that's why when people are like, and you think even to yourself, I'm wasting my time. Like, why do you think you're wasting your time? Is it because you think you should be doing something else? And if that's the case, why do you think you should be doing that? You need to assess these things and just understand that you're creating that perception.
Totally.
For yourself, right?
Totally.
And perhaps you need to unpack that and look at how you're perceiving things and why you're doing that. Because if you take the time to do that, you might be able to change your perceptions and have a better experience and a better relationship with time.
Yeah. I think it's good for us to leave people on, right? In terms of separating ourselves from this linear concept of time. You know, I'm not saying you don't believe what it is. It obviously has its merits. We've talked about this, right? There's practicality to it, for sure. But don't attach yourself to it. What happens when you detach yourself from that, right? Mm-hmm. There isn't linearity. There's no 12 hours. There's no 24 hours, whatever it is. What does it look like, you know? What does life look like to you then, you know? And then knowing that there is, you know, an end that is potentially unknown to you.
Yeah.
How would you spend your life differently?
Yeah.
Something to chew on, you know?
For sure. For sure. Cool.
Righto. We might wrap it there, but yeah. Why don't you tell us where our audience can find you, Shaun?
Yeah, man. Easiest place to find me is on Instagram. So SHAUN_COOP, Shaun_Coop. That's where you find me. And how about you?
Yeah, just on my website, findingspace.co. And also on Facebook and Instagram. My handle is @findingspace.co. You can also reach Shaun and I through our email address here through the podcast. Ask us any questions, any feedback, or suggest any guests, anything like that. Just get in touch. The Hustle and Flow podcast @gmail.com.
Cool, guys. And as always, just a modest request, a little fee for listening to our conversations in the program. If you got a nugget out of today, enjoyed the discussion, or feel that it could help someone else to hear it, please just share it out with one other person. That's all we ask. Just one share. And our hope with these conversations is to get them into more ears so that it provokes more thought and helps people to think about things they might not think about and improve their lives. So until next time, guys, thanks for listening.
See you guys.